Hello, friends. Welcome to the first ever episode of Wheel Tapping. This is going to be an 18XX focused show where my friend Tony Fryer and myself, at least initially, are going to kind of walk through one title of 18XX probably about once a month. This show is going to be, I think, very in-depth as to what a title holds, contains, and has for you. But we're not really shooting to do a review. We're trying to give you enough information so that you can make informed decisions and maybe find something cool. How you doing tonight, Mr. Tony?
I am doing fantastic, actually.
Fantastic. I like fantastic. Yes. That's good. That's good, right?
It is good. It is good. It's always fun to hang out with you and chat about games.
Right. I think initially we're just going to kind of, until we get this sorted out, I think we can just kind of do this one-on-one. And then I think as time goes on and we try different titles, maybe we bring in specialists that, you know, are better on those titles than like I might be or you might be. And then I think we could have some fun with that.
Absolutely, man.
So you helped bring up the name Wheel Tapping when we were kind of hunting around trying to figure out what to call this little show. You brought up Wheel Tapping as something you've used in the past. What exactly is it, sir?
Well, wheel tapping is a bit of railroad terminology where it comes from the old days where a train inspector would walk around the train tapping on the wheels with the hammer to test them for their integrity.
Okay.
So, we're kind of tapping on games, not necessarily testing them for the integrity, but you know, that's kind of the end goal of all these things, right? Is what kind of experiences those games give to us.
I love it. I love it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And we kind of chose 18Chesapeake for this week's, basic playthrough. We're going to talk about that one. And the main reason is because you and I both played this together. We have not played too many together because unfortunately I don't get out to Colorado nearly enough.
Nor do I get to Philadelphia nearly enough.
I have more reason to come to Colorado, sir, than you have to come to Philadelphia. But, we did get to play, and I think this is it's a perfect game to kind of introduce people to. We can both talk about it, and I think we're both very familiar with it to the point where you play tested it. So I think it has a lot to offer.
Absolutely.
So let's see. 18Chesapeake it's post Kickstarter right now. So it just was on Kickstarter not too long ago. And it's done by Scott Peterson, who does All Aboard Games. He's kind of transitioning to try and do larger print runs of things. And Chesapeake was probably one of the first ones he did that with. And you brought up some pretty cool facts on the Kickstarter, didn't you? You found some interesting stuff.
Yes, indeed. I find it to be amazing that 1,582 people backed this game on Kickstarter.
Wow.
Which is a phenomenal number for 18XX games. And the project raised over $169,000. So,
wow.
Woo-hoo.
Now, do you think that a lot of that has to do with either the approachability, the graphic design? Because I'd argue it's in the All Aboard line, he's raising the bar with this one a little bit, or the price point. Like, what do you think's some of the main factors?
I think all of those things, right? The mass production is allowing it to be available at a good price, especially compared to a lot of the hand-produced 18XX games, which also rolls right into graphic design is, on the level of other board games in our hobby, and that's also being allowed by the mass production. I also think that, yes, the game is approachable, but we're in a period where people are coming into the 18XX genre more often than I've ever seen before. And so this game and its approachability and its availability, coupled with the influx of people being interested in learning 18XX games, I think just helped this thing rocket.
Right. And I completely agree. It's, and it's exciting because I think the approachability and the ease of play And we'll get into this more as we talk about the game itself. I think, but that really helps lend itself to being, I would almost argue, a go-to teaching game now. Because I think there's, enough going on there. Some of the other classic teaching games can really turn into mean games. And I think this one has a tendency to have mean parts, but I don't think it's going to be a complete jerk game. Like, say, 89 can really be bad. All right. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to lead off by comparing each of the games that we feature. 1830 is the grandfather of the system, and I think it's fair to kind of basically give you an idea of what the game brings in 1830 terms. So check me if I'm wrong. This is basically, it's a standard 1830s auction. It has interesting minors, but they're handled just like 1830, where the trickle down effect, but some of the minors can be a little fun. Do you have any special minors? Like, I know Cornelius has changed once or twice in the process of testing and things, but he was always interesting, and he kind of was a little personal briefcase in a way.
Absolutely. The first thing I think is interesting is that you call them minors.
Privates. I mean privates.
East Coast, West Coast, Central, who knows, right? Everybody has their own slang for different aspects of the games, right? But
but they are privates, yes.
They are. He's a very interesting one because unlike 1830, in 18Chesapeake, one of the company's president's certificate is randomly distributed to that, and that can definitely cause some interesting things, particularly if it's a company that might not be one of the most desirable ones, and that's that personal briefcase maybe you were alluding to, because you can kind of sit on that private company is really a guy, right? So and just earn that $30 for a while, right? Because nothing else is going to pay you $30 for a bit.
No, and it's funny because he definitely can bring some cash. Otherwise, the privates behave like normal. They close, when the Browns hit. Nothing too crazy there. There's a bunch of I like to call them the barbell blockers, where they have the little train routes that are hex blockers until they're bought in, and they can only be bought in for double the value. Correct? There's nothing. You're not like going to buy $500 for a $50 miner or anything crazy like that.
Yeah, half to twice. Yeah, and those the ones you call the barbells, those are really particularly interesting and really important to control the ones you want. Towards the companies you might be interested in starting.
Exactly, especially if you are going to go into the Northeast, which we could talk a little bit more about when we hit the map part. But there's definitely a bunch of them that are very strategically placed to work very well with other major companies and things like that. Speaking of major companies, it's a full cap game, and it floats at 60% for your standard game, so nothing crazy there. And the shares move in a standard way in the market. It's your basic 3D market with ledges, shelves. They rise, they fall. They fall once for each share you sell, and they will only do single jumps. So we're not, unfortunately, doing multiple jumps, but, single jumps are still better than no jumps, right?
That's for sure.
Right. And none of that silly half holding. You either gotta pay it out or keep it to yourself.
That's right. Go big or stay on the porch.
The tile laying is pretty basic. You did point out something interesting that always escapes me when we play this, much to the chagrin of the other players, that the cities that start this game are all straights. So yellow cities they're only going to be straight tiles. And when you're doing Philadelphia and some of those tight corners up in that northeast corridor, that's you got to be really careful where you place those. And then the train rush, obviously a big part of any game. This one's interesting, and I think this is where we start to see the first kind of beginner friendly mechanisms, and that's the export feature, which will take a non-permanent train and remove it from the game at the end of every set of ORs. And that's nice because that helps keep things moving along even when people aren't buying trains. It may force a phase change in the middle of a beginning of a stock round. So, weird things can happen for sure.
Yeah, I definitely want to, when we get into things, I want to ask you about train rush and beginner friendly. Interesting dichotomy.
Well, beginner friendly in that it's not going to make the game last forever because, I think when people are first starting to play a game, I don't think they see the train rush happen the first time. So they tend to buy trains very slowly. And let's be honest, nobody wants to rust their twos because, hey, I'm starting to make money on the 3 twos I own. And this says, nope, you got to continue to play the game and think ahead and plan. Yeah. So
beginner friendly from the standpoint of not stalling the game, getting things moving along.
I kind of hate that forced stall. I think that can be really rough in a new player game. I think you need to power through that. And then let's get on to the map. So you have a bunch of points on the map, and you've certainly played the game a lot more than I have. I've played it 4 times at all player counts at 2, 3, 4. Actually, I haven't gone to 5 yet, so I don't know how tight it gets. But maybe you could speak to some of that.
Absolutely. I do find the map to be very fun to lay track on. And one reason is the choke points. Obviously, Baltimore and Philly are going to be big choke points because they're 0-0 tiles. And DC is also a good choke point, too. And DC is a very lucrative spot to be in as well. And 18Chesapeake is a richer game than 1830. Mm-hmm. And you can really get some nice runs going. And especially if you can do like Ohio to New York through DC. But that's a fairly tall order in a lot of games. So,
right. And I think some of the off maps are pretty good here too. Like, the New York goes pretty high towards the end of the game, but so does Pittsburgh. So if you can get some diesels late that are connecting all that stuff, you can make some pretty good coin.
Yeah, I think, one aspect of the map and those off boards that you mentioned is, you're making me recall something Scott said when he was introducing the game to me at a convention. And that is, versus 1889, the companies are more viable. All of the companies have some degree of viability in this game as opposed to some of the other companies.
Right, you're not going to get...
I think the map design helps that out, obviously.
Yeah, and I don't think you're going to get penalized. If you open the wrong company first, you're not going to get completely hosed. You might have to do some heavy lifting, but, I think there are better early games than late games, but I don't think it's a huge, that company's bad. No one's around to help you. It's not a horrible map as far as costs go for things. I think there's $80 mountains, there's some water, but it's not crazy where you have to pay for every hex. Like I just did the other night when I played NY and totally hosed myself a few times going, I have to pay for every hex. I have to remember that because it gets expensive. They also have some 30 doinks that you can pick up, or ticks, as I like to call them, that you can pick up pretty early in the game. So, 30 when you're running a 2 train is a very nice stop, I think.
Yeah. And one thing to always keep in mind in this game, since it uses the 1830 tile set, is those towns don't upgrade.
No.
So it's an important decision in a lot of places, like between Baltimore and Philly. How do you lay that doink? Stuff like that.
Yeah, and those crossing tiles and things like that really, they've caught me out in more than a few games not understanding the tile path. And we even use the jewelry trays that show you all the tiles, and you still mess it up.
We have this one guy, Mike, and he's just one of the nicest people you'll meet, except at the table. And when you are looking for a piece of track that you need, he's already figuring out how to deprive you of that track. He is a great player, but he lays the most evil track.
Oh, yes. And I would argue that that's probably the meanest point in this game. I don't think there's a ton of mean stuff people can do to each other compared to a lot of other ones, but I think the track laying can be particularly evil if you both aren't playing together.
Yeah, I find it to be kind of player specific, right? Like guys like Mike like to hurt you with the track, and most of the people in my group, just play relatively friendly with the track,
Yep. Not always the case. All right, so we're gonna break down the show. We just talked about what the basic part of the game is. We're gonna break it down into phases here because, you know, whenever you can do something thematic, we do. So we're gonna go through all the phases and kind of talk about different parts of the game and how they relate to each other. So coming up first is going to be the yellow phase, which we're going to really talk a little bit about the stock market and some of the stuff that can happen in that. And I'll let Tony lead this one off.
Sure. One thing you'll notice about the stock market is that it's not as big as 1830, and it has a limited, I don't know what to call it, height, if you will, so that when you're selling off stock, the values can only fall so far, right? There are more ledges in this smaller stock market. And so, you know, that makes things a little more friendly for people that are getting into the games and getting into the spirit of things.
Sure.
To not be, you know, completely tanked. But it still allows room for manipulating operating order by selling off shares and things like that. And it still has a yellow section for running companies into the yellow, but it doesn't have as vast of a yellow, orange, brown section as 1830. It doesn't have orange or brown at all.
Right. So it's pretty straightforward. I think if again, we're talking a lot about new players, but one of the things as a new player that always, and it still crushes me to this day, is when people buy your stock and turn around and sell it. So, you know, it's kind of disheartening to watch your stock drop three levels of value when you're just trying to run a good company. And this one, like you say, I don't think it beats you up that bad. The shelves help out. But ultimately, I think the stock market really helps this become a run good companies game. I think this is really about maxing out your company and trying to, you know, get it up into the highest share value possible. And I think the tools are there to make that happen.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I do think there is room for, because we see this when we play the game with more experienced people, it is still a run a good companies game, but there are still opportunities to, shall we say, make bad decisions as the president and allow someone else to run the company.
Sure. Either on purpose or not.
Perfectly, yes. Usually on purpose, I hope, you know. Because there is company dumping in this game.
Sure.
In 1830, that's, you know, a real possibility. In this game, it's less of a possibility, but it does occur. Particularly in 5-player, because at the start of the game, not everybody's necessarily running a company. And so, you know, Chris, you're going to see that situation where a player or two might just be acting as investors right now, right? And they're just going to take your stock and take your dividends and let it grow a little bit. Then they're going to dump that on the market to fund their own company.
Right.
And it's those instances that can, depending on how the priority deal lands, right? You can maybe take advantage of things. I at a local convention here last year, there was a memorable 5-player game where the B&O, which is a fantastic company in a fantastic position on the map, went through 4 of the 5 players.
Wow.
in very short order, right? So it was, I can't remember all the circumstances, you know, it was parred low, but it was full of 2 trains because the person that was running it specifically was just going to, you know, wreck the next player kind of a thing and move on. But, and then, you know, because there is that aspect of running good companies, you know, his idea was, I'm going to reinvest in it after this guy makes it a better company. So,
right. But he's on the hook to make it so and buy the trains for it and all that fun stuff. Yeah.
We'll have that come out of your pocket.
Fair enough. But, you know, I think you're right. You do have to pay attention because somebody could do that. But I think it's going to be pretty obvious when it's being telegraphed. So just pay attention to that. Cool.
It's not as harmful either.
Right.
You know, as we'll talk about when we get into some of the shenanigans.
Yeah. It's not uncommon to force buy a train at all. And speaking of trains, let's bring up the green phase. So the green phase really kind of focuses on the train buying and the rush. I already mentioned earlier that we export non-permanents to keep the game moving along. We're going to do that once every set of ORs. So I've actually seen that change phase because nobody wants to buy the poisoned 4, quote unquote. So it just disappears, and next thing you know, you're all staring at lovely 5 trains. So, but I do feel that the caps, the way they work in this game, because the par value maxes out at $95. And you pointed this out to me when we played, where you can't open a lake company for 100 and then buy 2 5 trains and hose everybody else, because you only get 950 in that company, and obviously you can buy one and not force buy the other. So you have to really be able to shuffle trains effectively, and you might have to leave a hole in the company to actually pay for that train out of pocket, because you can't get a lot of funds into the game late, because there's a bunch of companies, but there's not so many that can keep a 5-player game happily in the cash, I don't think.
One other aspect I like about that exporting that you mentioned is as you gain experience with the game, that it's kind of a tool, a known quantity that you can use as part of your plans, because you know that last 4 train is going to go away, or that last 2 train, or that last 3 train. So if you just have a little patience, it'll go away, then you get the train you want. But of course you have to weigh that, because if you're running fewer trains than other people, then they're getting incrementally ahead of you.
Right. And it's not that it's train tight either. It's not like some games where, there's only 2 of these type of trains, or, there's enough trains that you'll have some variety of choice potentially by the time you get to run. When you get high into the count, I think you have to pay attention, because I love a game that gives me the opportunity to trade in my 4 on like a diesel or the higher trains. And this one lets you do that, because you can trade in that train, get that little bit of value if you're the first person to do it, but everybody else doesn't get that benefit. So I love that, kind of helps ease the blow, and then maybe let you get a great train into a company that was about to lose a train altogether.
Yeah, the force buying, we had mentioned that having a company dumped on you is not as harmful or as impactful, because maybe this is a good time to mention one of Scott's design goals for the game, and that was that bankruptcy would remain a possibility, but not a super strong possibility.
Right.
So that people could experience the full game and experience, the forced buying of trains. And so in this game, 18Chesapeake, a lot of times you will be forced buying a train because of situations that have been foisted upon you. But as you say, you're engineering that train buying, that forced train buying, because your company maybe doesn't have quite enough. You got a little bit of money to chip in from your pocket. And so it makes better financial sense in the long run to take a short-term hit, but buy that train out of your personal finances, so your company can just, run that bad boy like crazy, right? Especially like when the diesels are in their early phases or their early availability.
Right.
Buy one, because there's still a good amount of game left that you're going to recoup your investment.
Yeah, it's not one of those, the diesels are out, we're going to do 3 more ORs and we're done. Like, chances are you're going to run that diesel for at least 6 ORs at that point.
There is a timing in there, but yes, there's a point where it won't make any sense to pay too much. But yeah.
No, absolutely. And honestly, the game is rich enough, generally speaking, to the players. As long as you have good shares, chances are you're going to have enough money laying around that you can take care of some of those things. That isn't to say that there aren't shenanigans in the game, because there definitely are times when we get into the brown phase, shenanigans. For those of you who might be new to 18XX, it's almost its own phase in the game when we say, all right, what shenanigans are going to happen? So we start moving things around, trains start to get shifted to different companies, you start to manipulate turn order and things like that. So shenanigans is just this whole term that is the piece where you're just doing things to just change some aspect of the game for yourself. And usually you're trying to do it to your benefit. It doesn't always work out. I'll let you start shenanigans, because you've probably had a lot more experience with that in this particular game itself.
Well, just the word shenanigans invokes a vision of shenanigans. It's one of those kind of words, you know. You know exactly what that means inherently. Yeah, so you know we've kind of been talking about the company dumping, and that's definitely a shenanigan. And when we play with experienced players, we do see a fair amount of it here and there. You know, I wouldn't call it a lot. You know, and the game pays out pretty well, so it's not a fatal thing when a company gets dumped on you necessarily. I've played 18 Chesapeake 16 times, and I have seen one bankruptcy, and that was the result of a fatal company dumping with a group of experienced players.
And that was just recently too, right? Because
it was. As a matter of fact, it was just like a week or so ago in the last time I played this.
And he came in second with cash.
Yes. So the player that was bankrupted actually finished second out of 4 players. But yeah, you know, most people in our group like to run a good company. There's a few players that'll never dump a company on you. There's people like me where buy 2 at your own risk, depending on the game, of course. Right. You know, so it's just one of those situations where you have to watch priority deal. You can still get companies dumped on you in this game. It's a fantastic thing to do to a new person because then they get to experience that aspect of 18xx gaming without knocking them out of the game or anything like that necessarily. And they get to experience all the joys of bringing that company back to life at your own expense.
Right. You know, and I think it's definitely interesting because this is the part I think that is learned very late in your 18xx kind of learning path, as it were, because you don't necessarily see everything that happens. You don't understand sometimes how somebody's just selling their own stock because they want to run after somebody who just opened because they want them to buy the train before you, because you want to get the later trains or things like that. And I think that's where this game has enough of a sandbox in it that you can really kind of play with some of those things and you're still relatively safe. Like the net's pretty good, the cash is good. So you're right. You do have to completely work very hard to go bankrupt in this game. It's not easy, and the money starts flowing, which is, I think it's a lot of fun. And then when you play a cash-starved game like a Sicily or an Ireland, it gets, you know, you really start to appreciate the ones that are a little looser and easier. But this one, I think that it's there, but I don't think it's the heart and soul of the game. It's not a 17 shenanigans game where that's literally what the entire purpose of the game is just to play with the market, play with companies and things like that. I think a lot of other titles do that really well, but I like the sandbox that you have here to, you know, try some of those advanced strategies and kind of play with them. So I think it helps that person who's teaching somebody to still have some stuff to work through and that new person have some stuff to play with.
Briefcasing?
Yeah.
Right. That's another one of my favorites. And this this game has, in particular, in my opinion, one company that often makes a good briefcase for some portion of the game, and that's the C&O.
Right.
It kind of starts out in the weakest position, but that doesn't mean it's a weak company. It actually can get to good track, and it has the most tokens of any company in the game. But in 1830 style games, if you don't have a route, you're not required to buy a train. So when you briefcase something, you start a company, you get it fully capitalized, you don't build any track for it, and then you use that money to buy trains for other companies, your other companies that you want to run better. You know, so of course that does mean that company is going to decline in value, so you're going to want to, you know, reduce your investment there and all that kind of stuff. But it is an interesting mechanic of 1830 games and other games, and one that I find employed in Chesapeake a fair bit, actually. Eventually, at least with my group, somebody builds that company some track. At some point in the game. You know, the map is fairly small, right? So it's not, you know, a huge deterrent to do that for somebody else. It doesn't come without a cost, right? Because you're not helping your own track when you're doing that. But I've only seen one instance of a briefcase being without track or train for the entire game.
Wow. That's not easy because I usually, like you say, I've seen other players, especially when you hit that point where there's not a ton left to do where you are. So then you're just like, well, I'm going to put some track down so he's forced to start running soon. Because it gets a little tough. But the briefcase tends to be most effective in a full cap game because you're getting credit for all the shares being sold, but you're only having to put in 60% at the start. So you're kind of getting 60 cents on the dollar out of that company. So it makes sense. I can see why one would do it.
Yeah, for sure. It often leads to the yellow strategy a little bit with this game. I mentioned the stock market has a little bit of yellow section in it.
Right.
We often find the briefcases between withholding, not having any revenue. Stock
just
sales,
falling back and plummeting.
Falling back, and we try to drive that into the yellow for a little bit. And then when someone buys it, a train, people start buying those shares because when they're in the yellow area, they don't count against your certificate limit. It's usually later in the game when you're tight against that certificate limit.
Right.
And then it's fun to try to okay, how long do I need to go back and forth between the yellow and then run out at the end, So it's the briefcase, even if you end up having to buy a train, it ends up, potentially, helping in other ways. So.
Right. So again, it's something interesting that you can kind of play with without having huge amounts of penalties or, people messing with you a ton, right? They can if they want to, but, they're not going to. They might leave you alone long enough that you can get the feel for how they work. And, I think when it comes down to a lot of any of the 18XX games, timing is kind of the crux and the system on everything runs, right? The timing of the trains, buying shares, opening companies, upgrades, laying track, whatever it is. If you time it right, you will pull out ahead, no problem. So the briefcase is another thing that you have to figure that timing out. You're just like, oh, I'm just going to do this. And then before long, you're building track and train for it because that's what you do.
Man, that timing aspect you mentioned is so spot on because the timing and how just player interactive these games are. These aren't multiplayer solitaire at all, right?
No.
That is such a fantastic puzzle to try to unwind in your mind and make work for you. And everybody's trying to do that at the same time, though,
Right. Absolutely. It makes it a lot of fun. And I think that that's a great lead into the last phase for us, which is going to be the gray phase, which is the feels of the game. Where does this game really kind of sit in comparison to other ones? What are some of the feels that you get from playing this game? You certainly have a lot to say on this because, you really, you have a very large group. You have a very varied group. So you see this for the whole spectrum of it. What are some of the feels that you see either you get or, you see in other players as you play this game?
Yeah, I think in my mind, for purposes of this conversation, I break it up into three things, right? One is if I'm teaching new players, which I actually end up doing a fair bit. Two is when I'm playing with more experienced players. There are people in my group that have been playing games since 1829, and I don't mean the year 1829. Jim's kind of up there, but I don't think he's born in 1829. And then the third one would be the two-player experience. So, that's how I frame this in my mind.
Right.
So first of all, when I'm teaching 18XX games to new players, Chesapeake has become my go-to. Not 89, not 46. I mean, not 30. I've seen new players learn on 1861, right? I don't, in reality, I think, the right game is whatever's right for that person, right? They might be a very experienced, heavy gamer or whatever. But in general, just Chesapeake's become my go-to. And one of the core reasons is just because of bankruptcy is less likely to happen. And really, when I'm teaching the game, I don't want that to happen. I want that to be a threat and a possibility, and I want the player to feel that,
right.
That danger, that sense of danger. But but I really don't want it to happen. I want the full game to unfold in front of them so they can experience all those things, those shenanigans we were just talking about. I want them to see all of the rich landscape of 18xx gaming, because it can definitely melt your mind, which is, why we play these silly games. I want that player to be, swept up. I like to say that 18xx games have depth and current, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want them to be swept up in that current, and there's the possibility of drowning, but they're not actually going to get drowned, right? They're gonna swim on through, and they might place third. Who cares, right? The point is, did you have fun? Are you enjoying these mechanics? So, and the second part of that would be that this game, because it lasts like that, and it does have a wide variety of mechanics, you get exposed to things like company dumping, companies being taken over, worrying about, you know what, I'm going to pass right now instead of spending money because I need the priority deal, or I can't let, Sarah have priority deal in front of me because she's going to dump that company on me. Briefcases, there's those choke points, so you have to kind of do plan B, route building. I guess I'll have to go around DC now. The auction is good. The private companies are good. Manipulating the operating order, there's ability to do that in this game by selling a share of this or selling a share of that. It just offers a lot of great experiences for people, and it does it softly. Again, the first time I got introduced to this game by Scott, he was like, "It's 1830 with some of the elbows sanded down," as I think the way he described it to me, and I probably butchered that from what he actually said, but that's the sense of it, right?
Right.
It's a little bit safer. I think you mentioned earlier, there's only like 3 par prices in the game.
Right.
Right. So like 95 and whatever the other two are, less than 95. But in 1830, there's 6 par prices. So right there, you got just less of a decision space, but not necessarily, that much, not 50% less impactful of a decision.
Right.
On where you're parring. So, it's my go-to teaching game. I have the pre-production copy, and it's been loaned out on 3 occasions, including right now, to people in California.
Sure.
One of my friends took it from tracks out to California and taught a bunch of people and sent it back. One of my friends in Wyoming has taken it twice. He has it right now to teach the people, and the feedback from the new people has been positive. So,
yeah. So one of the I agree with all that, and one of the points that I think this game is special in addition to that is that this is a really viable 2-player 18xx experience that I don't think a lot of other games have. You and I got to play this too, and it really kind of helps open up the teaching experience, because that way it's just you and the student playing together, and you don't have to worry so much about quote unquote ruining somebody else's game or anything like that. You can just say, hey, come over, we'll teach it in an afternoon. It's a 3-hour game, which is another great plus point, that it does a lot in a very short amount of time. But the 2-player game, it does something really interesting with the shares, right? Number one, President shares start at 30%. And anytime an opponent outside the IPO round buys a share, one of those gets removed from the game. So it allows you to actually, I used to think it was a crutch, right? Like, oh, my shares are disappearing. But what it actually is doing, it's allowing you to have companies fully held in a 2-player game, which is always a struggle unless it's like an 80 that lets you have 100% of your own shares. This allows you to do it as well. And there might be 1 share left in the company. And I've had a turn where somebody is like, I need that company to do well. I got 2 shares of it, so I'm just going to waste my turn and get rid of that share so it's fully held. So there's some interesting things that kind of happen as a result. And I really think that it's a fun, tight 2-player game. The last time I played it, we opened on complete opposite sides of the map and didn't even touch each other until we got into the browns heavily. And then for us, DC became the choke point because that's where everything ran through. Whereas a lot of times it's New York and then the corners where this game is played. This was a very different one. And I really loved it for that reason. I think that was a huge plus, and Scott came up with a great system for that.
Agreed. I think that I'm probably in the majority of the minority of 18X players that like two-player games. I think there's plenty of games that offer a good two-player experience.
Okay.
And this is definitely one of the top ones. I want to call out something else about the way that the shares disappear.
Right.
Because I think it does two more amazing things. And this is the only game I've seen do this.
Right.
Number one is, in a lot of two-player games, you end up with a 60-40 split of the best companies. Boring. So because of the share disappearing and stuff like that, the most balanced split you can experience in this game is kind of a 50-30 if things all fall the right way.
Right.
It's gonna be more lopsided than that. So I like that because 60-40 is boring. But what that really makes you do is start the other companies, right? So it keeps you churning through the roster of the companies in the game as well, and it puts more pressure on you because I can only have at most like 30% of your company if the chips fall right. So it puts the pressure to, all right, well, that company is good. I better get one of mine going just as good, and just drive. It's more current in the game.
Right. And you're also, because you have a 30% president share, not likely going to get dumped on you either,
Yeah, that's a great point, because you can own two safely.
Exactly. where there aren't many games you could have two safely. It's definitely, I really like it. I actually liked your copy so much that I went out and I hammered together my own version just so I could play it, because I'm impatient and I'm not waiting for Scott to print them, which hopefully we should be closing in on that soon.
Early this year.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. So it's going to see a lot more play when it comes out as well, when the real copy shows up, I'm sure. No doubt.
My friend Chad, he backed the Kickstarter. Obviously I backed the Kickstarter too, but he wants my pre-production version because it's the classic all aboard game style.
Right.
So I'm gonna have to surrender my copy to Chad when the Kickstarter arrives.
Yes, because depending on the art, well, it's going to be a double-sided board too. Like, it's going to have a pretty side and a basic all aboard side as well. Some interesting stuff. I like that, we're kind of at this age, and Grand Trunk is starting to do the same thing with their new releases, where we want to kind of push our art and our aesthetic forward. I don't think we want to go full GMT route with chunky tiles and stuff. I was on that bandwagon for a very brief moment, right? Like, I'm like, oh, these are great, and you play with them and they're great, but then having to actually manage them is a whole nother pain in the butt. So, having the laminated tiles, the thinner tiles, I appreciate more in the end.
Sure.
But I love that we're kind of moving a little bit that way, because I think to get more people to play, I think you do kind of need a slightly warmer aesthetic, and to get people to kind of engage a little bit more with the game. And I could be completely wrong. And I know that there are people who, don't touch my yellow, my brown, and my green, like they need to be perfect. But at the same time, I think if we can kind of open it up, that's more players for us to have to play with.
Absolutely, man.
So,
I totally agree.
So awesome.
I would like to say one thing about the other point there of viewing 18 Chesapeake as an experienced player.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody in the group I play with likes 1830's elbows.
Right.
And we have a lot of people that have been playing these games again, right, since 1829 came out, that love this, because some of those elbows, they are sanded down, so you can still experience some of those things without taking the full brunt of 1830. And so for example, next weekend Chesapeake is going to be on the table. because Nick is coming down with my copy again.
There you go.
But we're having a very large day. We have 15 people coming over to the house, and a couple of them have asked me, it's like, hey, let's play Chesapeake, and those are guys that have been playing for a long time. So
now
this does have a home. We've talked a lot about the new player. This does have a home with experienced players. I just want to be clear about that. It's a fantastic game.
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid point, because we have kind of been, talking about this as a beginner game, because I think that's what sets it apart, is its ability to do that. But I also think you're completely correct that there's so much meat on the bone to still leave you playing. What do you think is the point, the biggest jerk point in this game? Like, what do you think is the point where the elbow still exists in this game?
I think in two areas. One is we don't always play friendly on the track lays, particularly with certain folks, and you can do some stuff in that area. And then the other thing is just in buying trains and rusting your trades, right? So, and causing those people to not have any revenue for an OR or two, so.
Right. Like we talked a brief bit about the exporting trains, and that's a great help. It's going to help you move the game along, but it also means if you want to push the train rush, you're getting a little tailwind to do it. So it's not like it's getting exported if there was none purchased, like say an 80. No, it's flat out, that's going to go away. That 4 is going to go away. The new company that you're just about to open is going to buy the 5, and then we're going to be in a completely different game. So, no, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah. But it's a tool that helps the game move along. But, man, it may be totally geeky to say this, but it's a really good feeling that when the game just works out right, that I just ran my 2 trains and then bought the first 4. And you guys can't run yours. I mean, that's a really good feeling, I agree. No, insert sinister laugh here. Absolutely. Awesome. So let's bring this up, and we're gonna kind of wrap this up with the priority deal. And one thing that I got to experience when I got to be invited to your house and hang out for a couple days, one of them sick, unfortunately, but to play some 18XX games, I learned that you love to have, and actually, I did learn about this when you came on my show Game All Night, and we talked about it. You like to have special priority deal markers for all your games, or at least the special ones. So what is the priority deal marker for Chesapeake? Is it a crab? Is it you bring out a live soft-shell crab and you just throw it on the table? Or
I wish I was that creative. But you just given me an idea.
All right.
But no, the PRR, the Pennsylvania Railroad, is one of the companies in the game that's usually a pretty good company, and so we use this when we play Chesapeake.
Excellent.
So it's a boost with the logo.
Perfect. And it's funny because I've learned as I've done more print and plays, sometimes the PRR is green, sometimes it's red, depends on where you are. I kind of went the same road, although I'm having a little size envy because I just went N-gauge with mine, but I have a Chessie because I don't know if it's the cat. I don't know if it's the light blue that's normally associated with the Chessie, but I have a Chessie caboose as well. You've got me started to do this now with my games as well. So I love
the Chessie has a thematic tie to the name of the game, right? Chessie, Chesapeake.
Yep, the Chesapeake in Ohio is ultimately what the Chessie system is, correct?
Exactly. So
you're definitely more of a train guy.
Perfect.
Yeah, so it works. It works. So that's it. That's our show for the day. We're basically going to deep dive a title like this. I think you can infer how we feel about it. We're not going to attach numbers to this or anything because, frankly, if I played a game twice and we talk about it, I don't feel valid rating it. And I think these games, we really need to be, they need so many plays to really experience it. I think a rating is not suited to them. And I think they're all personal. right? So
Yeah,
we're gonna,
and, what I think about it doesn't matter what you think about it. Play it, get your own impressions.
Right. And hopefully you have some tools, whether you want to make that decision when it comes out and go purchase it or not. And, I think we gave you some insights that if you get a chance to play it, or one of the 1,500 people who backed it, you can, definitely get to play it. So I think it's all good stuff. If people want to find you, sir, where is going to be like the best place for them to get a hold of you?
Well, a couple of places. I'm on Twitter. It's the only social media I do. At A Fryer Games on Twitter. Board Game Geek. My username is really boring. It's Tony Fryer.
There you go. But it's easily found.
Easy to remember.
Yeah,
that's right. I'm always happy to chat with people about these games. It's something I really love. So.
Absolutely. So I'm Chris Whitpan. I host Game All Night. You can find me as Game All Night Show on Twitter, or Chris Whitpan on Twitter. But we're also going to start up an account for @Wheel Tapping on Twitter. And we also have the wheeltapping@gmail.com. So we'll at least start there. Whether the show gets its own channel or whatnot, we'll see what happens. But for now, it'll live there. And if you guys have suggestions on titles you'd like to hear or anything, hit us up. Let us know, and we'll put them in the queue if we know what we're playing. And I'm excited. This was a lot of fun, and I look forward to the next time. Thanks so much for making this happen, Tony.
Hey, thank you for making it happen. It was very enjoyable.
Excellent. So we'll catch you next time on Wheel Tapping.